My daughter-in-law screamed I stole her $200,000 right in my own living room. Evan, my only son, didn't ask questions. He told me to get out. By sunrise, I'd frozen their accounts and called the IRS. I'd spent years helping them manage their finances. Now I was dismantling them piece by piece. They thought I'd come back begging. Instead, the paperwork would speak for me. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The living room's quiet hum snapped like a wire under tension. Maggie Holt sat in her armchair, ledger open on her lap, the faint smell of lemon polish and roasted chicken still lingering from dinner. The front door slammed, and Brittany's heels clattered across the hardwood like gunshots. You stole $200,000. Brittany's voice was high and sharp, trembling at the edges. She thrust her phone forward, screen glaring, the numbers screaming red in the glow. Before Maggie could blink, Evan stormed in from the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel. He positioned himself behind Brittany, jaw tight, body angled like a wall. "What's going on?" he asked, but his tone already carried judgment. Brittany didn't wait. "The money was in our account yesterday. Today it's gone. All of it. And she's the only one here who could have touched it." The words hit the air like a thrown glass. Maggie kept her face calm, though her pulse picked up. "Which account?" she asked evenly. "Our joint checking and savings," Brittany said, voice cracking. "You've had access for years, Maggie. Don't you dare play dumb." Maggie remembered the last time she'd even logged into that account, over 5 years ago, when Evan asked her to help during a refinancing mess Brittany had forgotten to manage. Since then, she'd avoided it entirely, knowing boundaries were safer than proximity. If money's missing, the only way to know. "Don't start your accountant routine," Evan snapped, tossing the towel onto the counter. "She just showed me. The balance was there. Now it's gone. You've been home all day." Maggie closed her ledger and set it on the coffee table. "Evan, banking records tell a story. Screenshots aren't proof, they're fragments. Let me see the full statement. We'll call the bank together." Brittany's nostrils flared. "You're unbelievable. This is exactly why I don't trust you. You've resented me from day one." "Resentment doesn't move money," Maggie said, "and neither does assumption. Show me the transfers." "I don't have to show you anything." Brittany's voice rose, and she clutched her phone tighter, as if holding the screen close could make her claim true. Evan stepped closer, the space between them shrinking. "You've got the know-how, the access, and plenty of reasons. Just admit it, and maybe we can work this out." "There's nothing to admit," Maggie replied, her voice firm but steady. "If you're accusing me, then prove it with actual records. Until then, you're operating on a feeling, and feelings don't balance books." The click of the ceiling fan filled the silence. Brittany's perfume, a sugary floral, hung in the air, making the room feel even more stifling. Evan broke the pause. "Get out," he said, each word clipped. Maggie blinked. "Excuse me, you heard me. Get out of my house tonight." She rose slowly, the leather chair groaning under her, and looked at her son, the boy who once begged her to defend him over a broken window, who had trusted her word without question. "You're making a decision without evidence," she said quietly. "I've seen enough," he replied, eyes cold. Brittany crossed her arms but didn't speak. Her satisfaction wasn't in her expression, it was in the way she avoided looking at Maggie, as if guilt might be contagious. Maggie walked down the hall to her bedroom, took her purse, a cardigan, and the small black notebook from her desk drawer. She moved without haste, her mind already shifting from defense to calculation. When she returned, Evan was still standing by the couch, arms folded. She stepped past him without brushing his sleeve. "If you find your proof," she said, "send it to my email." The screen door creaked as she stepped into the heavy June night. The air smelled of cut grass and charcoal from a neighbor's grill. Street lamps cast long shadows across the familiar path to Claire Donnelly's house. Claire opened the kitchen door before Maggie could knock. The warm glow inside, was a sharp contrast to the darkness she'd left behind. The kettle on the stove hissed softly. Maggie set her purse on the counter, straightened her shoulders, and met her friend's steady gaze. "They just made the worst mistake of their lives," she said. The words from earlier still echoed in her ears, but here in Claire's quiet guest room, the air was different, cooler, steadier, scented faintly with lavender from the sachets Claire kept in the drawers. Maggie set her leather purse on the bedspread, pulled her laptop from its sleeve, and powered it up. The soft hum of the machine was a comfort, something precise and obedient in a day that had gone sideways. She typed in her personal bank credentials, fingers as sure as they'd been in her CPA days. Within minutes she was inside her own accounts. No red flags, no transfers. Not so much as a balance check on anything linked to Evan and Brittany's joint funds. She clicked through every history screen, each one a confirmation she hadn't touched those accounts in years. Her mouth set into a firm line. Facts first, emotions later. She reached for her phone and scrolled to Thomas Keene. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the deep, unhurried calm of someone who'd spent decades untangling other people's financial messes. "I need your brain," Maggie said without preamble. "You've got it. What's the situation?" She gave him the essentials: accusation, account, the number Brittany claimed was missing. Thomas didn't sound surprised. "You know you can request those records, Maggie. Even if you're not the primary, you've still got legal standing if your name's ever been on the account. You were an authorized user. History's history." "I thought so," she said. "Do it now," he advised. "Paper trails don't lie. People do." She opened a new browser tab, logged into the bank's customer service portal, and navigated to the secure request form. Her fingers moved quickly over the keys, entering the dates, the account number, and selecting complete statement with transaction details. At the bottom she typed "Request urgent review due to suspected fraud." When she clicked submit, the confirmation page popped up with a green checkmark. "Statement will be delivered via secure email within 60 minutes. From the kitchen, Claire's voice floated down the hall. "Coffee?" "Yes, please." Maggie called back, leaning into the chair. Claire appeared a moment later with 2 mugs, the steam curling upward. "I'll be here as long as it takes," she said, setting one down beside the laptop. Her tone had the no-nonsense ring of a woman who'd stood guard for friends before. Maggie wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat settle into her skin. She didn't need comfort so much as focus, but Claire's presence made the air feel less weighted. 48 minutes later, her email chimed. A message from the bank, subject line, "Requested statement, confidential." Maggie opened the PDF. The numbers scrolled past her eyes in neat black rows, but it didn't take long to spot them. 3 large withdrawals, each within the last week, each rounded to the thousand. The funds had gone to the same account, ending in numbers she didn't recognize. And then, initiated by field, she saw it. Brittany Holt. Her name 3 times in bold attached to transactions that had nothing to do with Maggie. Her pulse slowed, not from shock, but from the cool clarity of confirmation. They hadn't checked. They'd gone straight to accusation, skipping the part where truth lives. Claire, reading her expression, leaned closer. "Bad?" Maggie turned the laptop so her friend could see. "Not for me." The cursor blinked in the corner of the document, steady as a heartbeat. Maggie didn't move. She was already cataloging her next step. Because this wasn't just proof, it was leverage. The printer on Claire's desk hummed to life, spitting out sheet after sheet of the statement Maggie had requested. The scent of warm toner filled the small room, a smell that always reminded her of long nights at the accounting firm, building airtight cases out of numbers. She stacked the pages neatly, then slid into the chair with a yellow highlighter in hand. Each pass of fluorescent ink marked another withdrawal, with Brittany's name on it. 3 large transfers to the same mystery account, along with a series of charges that read like a high-end shopping spree. Neiman Marcus, Cartier, and a weekend charge at the Crescent Hotel in Uptown. When the last line was marked, Maggie leaned back, studying the glowing stripes across the paper. Not just proof, patterns juries understood. patterns that could dismantle a lie in less than 5 minutes. She called Thomas. He picked up on the first ring. "Tell me you have something." "I have more than something," she said, flipping through the pages. 3 direct transfers, big ones, same account number each time. And the rest of it reads like a luxury catalog. Thomas let out a low whistle. "Good work. Now you lock it down. 2 copies minimum. One where you can grab it fast, another somewhere no one will think to look." "Already on it," she replied. Within the hour, she'd printed 2 additional sets. One went into a manila envelope, tucked deep inside a drawer in Claire's kitchen, where the takeout menus lived, safe, forgettable, invisible. The other slid beneath the false bottom of a tote in the trunk of her car, between a folded picnic blanket and an emergency kit. She knew better than to keep all the ammunition in one place. Money trails were delicate things, paper trails were not. With the statements secured, she opened her black notebook and began a timeline, not a diary. Diaries invited emotion. This was a legal document in the making. She logged each moment with precision. The time Brittany burst in, the exact words she'd used, the timestamp on Evan's demand that she leave, the hour the bank's email had arrived. By the time she capped her pen, the events sat in clean order, impossible to bend without breaking. Her phone buzzed on the table. A notification from Facebook. Against her better judgment, Maggie clicked. Brittany's latest post was a black square with white text. "Betrayed by family, money gone, trust shattered." The comments section was a feeding frenzy of sympathetic emojis and praying for you replies from people who didn't know the truth. Maggie read it twice, the corner of her mouth curling, not in amusement, but in acknowledgement. Every post like this was another thread. Brittany was tying into a net she didn't realize would catch her. Claire, leaning in from the kitchen doorway, raised an eyebrow. "She's fishing for sympathy already. She's baiting the wrong pond," Maggie said, closing the app. The phone rang again, but this time the caller ID lit up with Thomas's name. "I've been thinking," he said, without greeting. "If you're ready, you can freeze that account tomorrow. You've got standing as an affected party with documented suspicious activity. The bank won't hesitate with this much evidence." Maggie felt the air shift, like the moment before a storm when everything goes still. "Tomorrow then." She hung up, eyes resting on the stack of highlighted statements. They weren't just records. They were the lever she was about to use to move an entire house of lies. By sunrise, Maggie was already dressed in her navy slacks and pressed blouse, the kind of outfit that made people take her seriously without thinking about why. She slipped the manila folder of statements into her leather tote, alongside her black notebook, and stepped out into the cool Dallas morning. The drive to the bank was quiet, just the low hum of the tires on the asphalt. Claire rode shotgun, her travel mug steaming between her hands. "You sure you don't want me to come in with you?" she asked. Maggie shook her head. "This part's mine." Inside, the bank's lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee from the small refreshment station. Maggie walked straight to the reception desk and asked to speak with the branch manager. Her voice carried the calm precision of someone who knew exactly what she was entitled to. The manager, a trim man in his 50s with a maroon tie, met her at his office door. "Mrs. Holt, please come in." She laid the printed statements on his desk, sliding them forward until the highlighted lines caught the light. "I'm here to request a fraud hold on the Holt joint account. I am an affected party. These are the transactions in question." He adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages. "These transfers weren't authorized by you." "No," Maggie said, crisp and clear. "And I have documentation to prove my account activity is separate. You'll see the amounts, dates, and beneficiary account number, same target each time." For several minutes, the only sound was the faint clicking of his keyboard as he pulled up the account records. Maggie sat still, her tote resting on her lap, the steady rhythm of her breathing the only sign of how tightly she was holding her composure. When he looked up, his expression was neutral but decisive. "You're correct. These transactions are consistent with suspicious activity. We can place the account under a temporary fraud hold effective immediately." Maggie allowed herself the smallest nod. and you'll issue a letter confirming that action. Of course. He typed a few more lines, printed a document, and signed it in blue ink before sliding it across the desk. The words "account frozen pending investigation" were bold in the center. She took the letter, folding it once and tucking it into her notebook like it was the final page of a long play chess match. Thank you for your time. When she stepped back outside, the Texas sun had risen high enough to warm the pavement. Claire leaned out the open car window. Well? Maggie climbed in, shutting the door with a deliberate click. It's done. Claire's smile spread slow and wide. Good girl. As they drove back, the light cut sharp angles through the windshield, flashing across Maggie's folded hands. For the first time in 24 hours, her shoulders loosened. She hadn't gotten her home back. Not yet, but she'd stripped Brittany of something she valued just as much: control. They were halfway up Claire's driveway when Maggie's phone lit up. Brittany's name filled the screen. She let it ring twice before answering, holding it a few inches from her ear. "You?" Brittany's voice was a shriek, cracking on the first word. "I can't pay for anything now. My cards aren't working, my online banking is locked. What did you do?" Maggie glanced out the window at Claire's blooming crib myrtles. "You might want to check with your bank," she said evenly. "You're going to regret this." Brittany snapped, the sound of her breath harsh against the receiver. Maggie ended the call mid-sentence and powered the phone off, sliding it into her bag. Claire parked the car and cut the engine. That, she said, was the sound of a woman realizing she's not as untouchable as she thought. Maggie stepped out, the folded fraud-hold letter still warm from the printer in her notebook. This wasn't just defense anymore, it was the opening volley. They expected a fight. She gave them quiet. Maggie's phone lit up for the 6th time that morning, Evan's name flashing in bold white letters, the preview text screaming in all caps, "We need to talk. Answer me." She let it fade to black. The soundless dismissal felt better than any shouted defense could have. She knew that silence, properly timed, could be more unsettling than 1,000 explanations. On social media, Brittany's curated image was cracking. Maggie didn't follow her directly, but Claire, ever the neighborhood radar, showed her screenshots over coffee. The first post had been cryptic. "Never thought family could betray me like this." The second was sharper. "Can't believe what she's done. Pray for us." By the third, Brittany's tone had turned defensive, responding to comments from friends who were clearly confused. "Why's your account frozen?" someone asked. Brittany replied with a teary face emoji and long story. "Not my fault. They're unraveling," Claire said, tilting the tablet toward Maggie. "Let them stew." Maggie smiled faintly. "Stewing brings out the truth, or burns it down to ash." While the Holts were spinning their story online, Maggie stayed anchored in the real one. Thomas called mid-afternoon with an update. The bank's fraud team was working quickly, combing through the flagged transfers. "From what I've seen, they've already linked at least 2 of those withdrawals to accounts Brittany controls directly. Your documentation makes it pretty airtight." "That's good," Maggie said, flipping the page of the mystery novel in her lap without really reading it. Thomas's tone turned wry. "She's either panicking or planning something stupider. My bet's on both." Maggie filled her days with the kind of calm that would have looked like aimless leisure to anyone else. In truth, it was a strategy. She spent hours on Claire's wraparound porch, the late summer Dallas heat wrapping around her like a heavy blanket, cicadas buzzing in the trees. The scent of Claire's rose bushes mixed with the sharp tang of fresh-cut grass from the neighbor's yard. The wicker chair creaked under her as she settled deeper, letting the world slow to her pace. She read in long stretches, sipped iced tea from a sweating glass, and watched the mail carrier move methodically down the street. She didn't respond to calls. She didn't check Brittany's posts. She let the quiet grow teeth. One evening, as the light drained from the sky and the air took on that soft violet hue before nightfall, Maggie's laptop chimed with a new email. The sender's name made her sit straighter. Rosa Morales. The message was brief but potent. "Got more. She's been moving money offshore." Maggie reread it twice, her mind already stitching together the implications. Offshore accounts meant more than hidden spending. It suggested deliberate concealment, possibly for tax evasion or money laundering. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. Brittany had stepped onto a much more dangerous playing field. Claire noticed the shift in her posture. News? Big news, Maggie said, closing the laptop gently. Brittany's been moving money out of the country. Claire's brows lifted. That's not the kind of thing you can spin as an accident. Exactly. Maggie's voice was calm, but her eyes held a sharper light now. It means Rosa's digging in the right direction, and it means Brittany's world is about to shrink considerably. The next morning, the air felt heavier, as if the neighborhood itself sensed the shift. Maggie stood by Claire's kitchen window, watching the slow crawl of cars along the cul-de-sac. Somewhere inside the Holt house, Brittany was likely pacing, phone in hand, trying to call anyone who might listen. Her own phone buzzed with a new email. She opened it immediately. Rosa's message was as succinct as the last one, but it landed with the weight of a gavel. Visiting Dallas in person. Will update when I arrive. Maggie closed the message, a slow, deliberate smile forming. The game was about to change again, and this time it would happen face to face. They thought she'd come crawling back, but the knock on the door wasn't hers. It came just after 9, crisp and deliberate, 3 sharp raps that carried authority. Maggie opened Claire's front door to find Rosa Morales standing there in a tailored navy blazer, her badge glinting in the Texas sunlight. Flanking her were 2 other agents, both in muted suits and mirrored sunglasses, the kind of quiet intimidation that spoke louder than shouting ever could. Maggie Holt? Rosa's voice was steady, the kind of calm that made people nervous. That's me. Maggie stepped aside, holding the door wide. The air conditioning spilled out into the already warming morning, carrying with it the faint scent of Claire's cinnamon coffee cake, cooling on the counter. Inside, Rosa's eyes swept the room, not with suspicion but with the quick precision of someone who mentally catalogued everything. First off, thank you, she said, shaking Maggie's hand firmly. The documentation you provided is meticulous. A small private smile crossed Maggie's face. Old habits die hard. They sat at Claire's dining table, the same table where Maggie had first read the damning bank statement. The agents leafed through a slim black folder, occasionally nodding. Rosa tapped one page with a manicured nail. This is exactly the kind of paper trail that holds up in court. Transfers, dates, recipient accounts. You left nothing to interpretation. Maggie's reply was measured. Numbers don't lie. People do. Rosa's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then she rose, tucking the folder under her arm. We're heading over there now. By there she meant the Holt house. From Claire's front porch, Maggie watched the black government sedan pull away, sunlight glancing off its windshield. She imagined the road, just 3 turns and they'd be at her old driveway, the same one she'd been told to leave behind. She didn't have to imagine long. Half an hour later, Claire's phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor down the street. 3 agents just went into Evan and Brittany's. You won't believe the look on her face. Claire read it aloud, then chuckled. Bet she's regretting her hashtags now. The neighborhood grapevine moved faster than broadband. By the time Rosa's team had been inside 10 minutes, half the street was finding reasons to be outdoors. Watering plants, walking dogs, checking mail that had already been collected. Through snippets of overheard conversation and quick text updates from her informants, Maggie pieced together the scene. 2 agents in the living room. Rosa speaking directly to Brittany, who was sitting rigid, her fingers clutching the arm of the sofa. Evan hovering nearby, jaw tight, trying to interrupt. 25 minutes later, the agents emerged. Brittany's face was, as Claire put it, pale as unbaked bread. They didn't take anything, Claire reported after getting the lowdown from another neighbor, but they wrote plenty down. Maggie simply nodded. She knew better than to expect handcuffs on the first visit. This was the opening move, the kind designed to unsettle and make the target trip over their own lies later. When her phone buzzed minutes later, Evan's name appeared on the screen. She let it ring, each vibration a small victory. It was nearly dark when Rosa's number lit up her phone. Maggie answered on the first ring. Evening, Rosa said. Her tone was casual, but the words weren't. She's lying about where the money went. Maggie leaned against the kitchen counter, the cool marble under her fingertips. How bad? Bad enough that she couldn't keep her story straight for 15 minutes. Offshore transfers, phantom business expenses. She's trying to build a wall of excuses, but the bricks don't fit. Maggie's lips curved slowly. Then we just have to let her keep building it. Rosa's voice carried a note of quiet satisfaction. Exactly. And when it collapses, she'll be standing right under it. The call came mid-morning. Rosa's tone clipped but tinged with a quiet satisfaction. Her story's already unraveling, she said without preamble. Brittany claims the missing money was for emergency home repairs, but 5 minutes later she said it was for a business investment. Maggie swiveled in Claire's desk chair, the faint smell of lemon polish rising from the wood. Interesting, she said, because I have receipts that say otherwise. They met at Claire's dining table again, Rosa on speakerphone, while Maggie spread out neat stacks of evidence. Crisp paper rustled as Maggie slid forward copies of credit card slips, each one linked to the Holt joint account. Neiman Marcus, she read aloud, tapping the date at the top. $2,419. Same week she claimed to be paying for plumbing repairs. She didn't need to embellish. The truth had its own sting. Rosa's chuckle came through the line, low and knowing. Send them all. Every single one. Thomas arrived shortly after, his leather briefcase clicking open with the precision of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. We'll need a master index, he said, already pulling out tabs and dividers. Dates in chronological order, receipts matched with bank transactions, side-by-side comparisons for easy reference in court. They worked for hours, Maggie's handwriting neat and sharp as she labeled each section. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the faint ink smell from the printer, pages sliding into clear sleeves one by one. This is exactly why I called you, Thomas said without looking up, because Brittany Holt has no idea who she's picked a fight with. By late afternoon, the evidence binder was a thing of beauty. Black leather cover, silver rings snapping shut, every page secured in place. Maggie ran her palm over the smooth surface, the weight of it both literal and symbolic. Claire peeked in, wiping her hands on a dish towel. You know, she said, I haven't seen Evan post a thing since those IRS agents left. Not even a photo of his lunch. For him, that's saying something. Radio silence is a good sign, Maggie replied. Means they're too busy scrambling. But she wasn't scrambling, she was planning. While Thomas reviewed the final binder, Maggie opened her laptop and began browsing apartment listings. She had no interest in returning to the Holt house, even if she could. The idea of a quiet place, hers alone, was pulling at her more each day. Claire caught her at it and smiled knowingly. Somewhere with a balcony, she suggested, so you can drink your coffee in peace without someone accusing you of draining their fortune. That's the plan, Maggie said softly, clicking through a photo of a sunlit kitchen. When the binder was finished, Thomas called a courier service he trusted. Within the hour, a man in a dark polo and ball cap was at the door, clipboard in hand. Maggie handed over the binder herself, watching until he carried it to the unmarked sedan at the curb. Straight to Rosa's office, Thomas assured her. No detours. The door shut behind them with a quiet finality. Maggie exhaled slowly. The facts were out of her hands now, but in exactly the right ones. It was nearly dusk when her phone buzzed again. Rosa's voice carried through, firm and certain. The inconsistencies in her statements, combined with your documentation, are more than enough. We'll be filing something soon. Maggie leaned back in the chair, the warm amber light from the kitchen spilling across her face. Good, she said. Let her try to keep her story straight in front of a judge. Maggie woke to the distant hum of lawnmowers outside Claire's window, the scent of brewed coffee drifting in from the kitchen. Her phone screen lit up with a news alert, brief, clinical, and devastating for its subject. Dallas woman charged with federal fraud and tax evasion. Beneath the headline was a photo of Brittany, sunglasses hiding her eyes, mouth pressed into a tight line, as she was escorted by two agents toward a black sedan. The news spread through their upscale neighborhood, like a grass fire in July. Group chats buzzed, phone lines lit up, and by noon, Half the social circle Brittany had curated for years had seen the footage. The woman who'd once boasted about controlling the narrative now had no control at all. Claire stood at her front window, phone in hand, narrating updates from a mutual friend. Apparently, she didn't even pack her own overnight bag. Evan was the one frantically throwing things into a suitcase while the agents waited. Maggie didn't respond right away. She was studying the copy of the official court filing Rosa had sent her, pages of legal language that spelled out exactly what Brittany had been doing with the Holt joint account and beyond. There was a cold, precise satisfaction in seeing the truth laid out in black and white. By mid-afternoon, Evan was spotted outside the house alone, his hair uncombed, shoulders sagging as he dragged the trash bin to the curb. Maggie imagined the silence inside. No Brittany filling the air with sharp instructions or performative laughter, no scent of her cloying perfume lingering in the hallway. Claire, never one to miss a beat, slipped on her sunglasses and took a walk down the street. When she returned, her expression carried the kind of restrained gloom only a seasoned neighbor could pull off. "Movers are there," she reported. 3 men, 2 trucks, and not a single Holt family heirloom among the boxes. Looks like they're only hauling her stuff. The mental picture was vivid. The sound of cardboard being sealed with sharp rips of packing tape, the thud of furniture legs against truck ramps, and Brittany's carefully curated designer wardrobe being wheeled down the driveway in garment bags that looked suddenly less glamorous. Maggie sat at the kitchen island with her timeline notebook open, the neat handwriting marching across the page like a soldier's log. She wrote 2 words in bold: Phase 2. Complete. Then she closed the book, feeling its weight in her hands as if the paper itself carried the burden she'd been forced to shoulder. Her phone rang, and Rosa's name appeared. "Just wanted to thank you," the agent said warmly. "Without your documentation, this would have taken months longer. As it stands, we have a strong, clean case." Maggie allowed herself the smallest of smiles. "Numbers don't lie," she said again, the phrase having become her quiet refrain through the ordeal. "We'll keep you posted on court dates," Rosa added. "But for now, you're in the clear. Officially." It was what Maggie had known all along, but hearing it in Rosa's voice sealed something inside her, a sense of finality and vindication that no apology from Evan or Brittany could ever match. That night, the air outside was thick with the scent of cut grass and distant barbecue. Maggie sat on Claire's back porch, the soft creak of the swing beneath her, when her phone buzzed with a new text. It was from Evan. Just 2 words: "Can we talk?" Maggie stared at the message for a long moment, the glow of the screen casting pale light over her hands. He was alone now. No Brittany feeding him lines, no audience to perform for. But the damage had been done, and the next move would be hers. The cafe was busy but hushed, the low hum of conversation blending with the hiss of the espresso machine. Maggie chose a corner table, back to the wall, where she could watch the door. She sipped her tea slowly, the steam curling up and catching the light from the window. She'd agreed to this meeting for one reason only: to control the tone and to end it when she decided. Evan arrived late. His shoulders were slumped, his shirt untucked in a way she hadn't seen since he was a teenager. When he spotted her, he hesitated, just long enough for Maggie to register the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Thanks for coming," he said as he sat, his voice softer than she'd expected. "I have 20 minutes, Maggie replied. Folding her hands on the table, he leaned forward. I wanted to say I'm sorry, for that night, for believing," he stopped, then sighed. "I just didn't know who to believe." The words landed like a dull thud. Not an admission of fault. Not really. Maggie kept her voice even. "You didn't check the facts. You reacted." She reached into her bag and placed a single sheet of paper on the table between them, the official bank letter printed on crisp stationery, clearing her of any involvement in the missing funds. Evan's eyes scanned the document. "Brittany, she handled everything with the money," he murmured. You didn't ask." Maggie finished for him. He winced. She watched him fumble with the coffee cup he'd ordered, the ceramic clinking against the saucer. His hands, once steady, now shook slightly. The faint aroma of burnt espresso wafted between them, but Maggie didn't touch hers again. The door chimed and Claire walked in, her bright scarf trailing over one shoulder. She spotted them and made her way over, greeting Maggie with a warm pat on the arm. "Thought I'd keep you company," she said with a smile that held just enough steel to make Evan shift in his seat. Claire slid into the chair beside Maggie, and without missing a beat, began talking about a new home renovation project she'd started, entirely steering the conversation away from any Holt family drama. Evan's attempts to redirect fizzled against her steady, deliberate chatter. After 10 minutes, Maggie gathered her bag. "I have somewhere to be," she said, standing. Evan looked like he wanted to stop her, but whatever words he had were swallowed by the noise of the milk steamer at the counter. "I'm not making any promises," she added before walking toward the door, the bell chiming again as it closed behind her. She didn't glance back. Later that evening, the amber light of sunset spilled across Claire's kitchen as Maggie scrolled through her email on her tablet. One new message stood out: Rosa Morales. The subject line was brief: "Plea deal." Maggie opened it. "Brittany has taken a deal: restitution, probation, and full cooperation. I'll call you tomorrow with details." Maggie set the tablet down, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. She allowed herself a long, steady breath. The game had shifted again, and this time she was holding every card. She thought she could buy time. Time ran out. The news came through in a short, matter-of-fact call from Rosa Morales. "It's official," she said. "Plea deal signed. Restitution to both the IRS and the bank. 5 years probation and strict travel restrictions." Her voice carried the calm satisfaction of a job neatly finished. But Maggie knew the real sting for Brittany wasn't the probation, it was the debt. Maggie set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, Dallas was bathed in a pale winter light, the branches bare, the streets quiet. She imagined Brittany sitting somewhere in a cramped office, pen in hand, realizing she had just traded her future for a fraction of her freedom. By the end of that week, Evan had moved out of the house he once shared with Brittany. No moving truck, no public display, just a sedan loaded with boxes and a sagging futon. Claire had seen him at the gas station 2 streets over. "Looked like a man carrying his own shadow," she told Maggie over tea. Evan's new place was a 1-bedroom apartment in a complex that overlooked a parking lot and a cluster of dumpsters. Maggie didn't ask how she knew, but Claire always seemed to know. Rosa called again the following day, this time with the final detail Maggie had been waiting for. "Her restitution payments will take decades, even if she works full-time," Rosa said, "and with her probation record, I doubt she'll get the kind of job she's used to." There was no sympathy in her tone, just the clean edge of reality. Maggie pictured Brittany checking her bank account every morning, finding it drained by automatic payments she could never stop. It was the sort of slow bleed that left a permanent mark: financial ruin disguised as a bureaucratic process. Claire, never one to miss a reason for cake, decided the moment called for celebration. She appeared at Maggie's door one evening with a 3-layer chocolate cake covered in thick frosting and dusted with cocoa powder. "For you," she said, setting it down on the kitchen counter. "And before you ask, yes, I plan to eat half of it." They cut generous slices and sat at the small table, forks scraping gently against porcelain. "To justice," Claire toasted, raising her fork. "To clean accounting," Maggie replied with a faint smile. Later that night, Thomas called. His voice was warm and edged with pride. "I have to hand it to you, Maggie," he said. "It's a clean win. You stayed patient, gathered your evidence, and didn't let emotions get in the way. Not many people could have done that." "It wasn't about winning," Maggie said, though part of her knew that wasn't entirely true. "It was about making sure the truth stuck." She was halfway through washing the last plate when her phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a name she hadn't decided whether she wanted to see: Evan. She dried her hands, hesitating just long enough to feel the tension settle in her shoulders. She answered. "Mom," he said, his voice careful. "I need to ask you something." Maggie waited. "I'm in a bad spot right now. The bills." He stopped, exhaling slowly. "Can you help me out?" Just for a while. I'll pay you back." The request hung in the air like a draft from an open door, carrying the weight of history with it. Maggie didn't answer right away. She let the silence do the work, knowing that whatever she said next would change everything about what came after. Maggie let the silence hang for a beat longer before answering Evan's request. Her voice was steady, stripped of any hesitation. "No, Evan, I won't give you money." There was a pause on the other end, the kind that stretched too long, heavy with disbelief. "You're serious?" he asked, as though she'd just made a joke in poor taste. "I'm serious," she said. "If you're struggling, you need to get your own financial counseling. There are programs for that, free ones." "But I won't be your bank." Evan exhaled sharply. She could almost hear the way he rubbed his temple, the same gesture his father used to make when a conversation wasn't going his way. "I'm not asking for a handout, just a loan." Maggie's tone didn't waver. "That's the same thing right now. I know your situation, Evan. I've seen how fast the money goes when Brittany was steering. You need to learn to handle it on your own." He didn't argue further, just muttered something that sounded like fine and hung up. The abrupt click in her ear was final, and oddly freeing. Claire, who'd been sitting at the kitchen table flipping through a magazine, glanced up at Maggie. "Was that him?" "Yes," Maggie said, pouring herself a fresh cup of coffee. The steam curled upward, carrying the warm scent across the room. "He asked for money." Claire arched a brow. "And you said no." Maggie's lips curled faintly. "I said no. That's new for me. You've come a long way in a matter of weeks." Claire said, her smile approving but not overly sentimental. "You've gone from letting them run over you to building a brick wall they can't get past." That afternoon, Thomas called to review her investments. She sat at Claire's desk, the faint scent of lemon polish rising from the wood, as Thomas walked her through numbers and performance charts. "Your portfolio's grown since last quarter," he said. "The trust you set up is airtight, and your cash reserves are exactly where they should be. You're in better shape now than before all this started." Maggie felt the corners of her mouth lift. "So I'm not just financially intact. I'm better off, and harder to reach," Thomas replied. "That's the sweet spot." Later she opened her laptop and logged into her bank account. Her cursor hovered over the transfer tab, but not toward Evan, not toward anyone she owed nothing to. Instead, she set up an automatic monthly donation to a local literacy charity she'd supported on and off for years. If she was going to give money away, it would be to people who valued the gift and put it to good use. She typed in the amount, clicked confirm, and felt lighter. Evening settled in, the light shifting to a deep amber that spilled across the hardwood floor. Maggie sat back in the armchair near the window, her book resting in her lap unopened. The quiet felt earned. She was thinking about making tea when her phone lit up with Rosa Morales's name. Maggie answered on the first ring. "Margaret," Rosa said, her tone brisk, but carrying an undercurrent of satisfaction. "I wanted you to hear it from me first. Case closed." Maggie sat up straighter. "That's it?" "That's it," Rosa confirmed. "No further actions needed on your part. You're free and clear. And for the record, you handled yourself better than half the people I've worked with." The words sank in, solid and warm, like the final lock sliding into place on a heavy door. Maggie leaned back, the smallest of smiles tugging at her lips. Free and clear. She liked the sound of that. The ink bled black against the thick parchment, each stroke of her signature sealing another layer of protection between her life and the people who had tried to dismantle it. Maggie slid the final page of the trust document across the mahogany table toward Thomas, who was already poised with his own pen. "This makes you the sole trustee," Thomas said, double-checking the notary's stamp. "No co-signers, no secondary access, no loopholes. Exactly how I want it," Maggie replied. Her voice was quiet, but the edge in it carried years of patience finally cashing in. The trust didn't just hold her savings, it swallowed every asset she owned. The condo she'd purchased after leaving the Holt house, her investment accounts, even the modest checking account she used for daily expenses, all of it was now locked under her control alone. She'd made the second, more satisfying move earlier that morning. Evan and Brittany's names had been erased from every beneficiary list she'd ever had. Retirement funds, insurance policies, the small life insurance plan her late husband had left, every document had been updated and initialed in bold ink. "I'll sleep better tonight," she told Claire, who was perched at the corner of the table, sipping coffee and watching the process like it was the final scene of a courtroom drama. "You'll sleep like someone who just bolted the last window shut in a house they actually want to keep," Claire said with a smirk. When the witnesses were called in to finalize the trust, Thomas remained at Maggie's right and Claire took the left. Their signatures joined hers in neat rows under the legal jargon, anchoring the document to reality. The notary, a woman with salt and pepper hair and the brisk efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, pressed her stamp down with a sharp thunk. "That's it," she said. "It's yours, all yours, until you say otherwise." The weight of those words lingered, richer than any apology Maggie had never gotten from Evan. From there she moved to the next task, updating her will. She sat with Thomas in his office, the smell of leather-bound ledgers and faint printer toner in the air, and crossed out every outdated clause. Caleb Holt, the grandson she'd barely seen since Brittany married Evan, was now her sole heir. No caveats, no family shares, no splitting the estate. The cottage, the investments, even the silver tea set that had been her grandmother's, Caleb would inherit them all. Thomas looked over his glasses at her. "You understand this will make things awkward if your son ever finds out." She smiled. He made things awkward when he believed her without a single question. One by one, the little tendrils of connection that still linked her to the people who had cast her out were snipped. The next stop was her cell provider, where she changed her number and had it marked private. Claire insisted they celebrate afterward with lunch, but Maggie's mind was already on the last errand of the day. When they returned to Claire's, a cream envelope was waiting in the mailbox. No return address, just a neat, careful hand spelling her name. Inside was a short note from Rosa Morales, typed on official IRS letterhead. "Case officially closed. You were an exceptional client to work with. Wishing you peace and privacy going forward." It wasn't sentimental, but it was exactly what Maggie valued most: professional closure. She slipped it into a folder labeled Holt Case, complete, and filed it away in the locked cabinet in her study. The final task felt ceremonial. She walked into the downtown branch of the bank with a single folder in her hand, and approached the same marble counter where she'd once handled deposits for her old CPA clients. "I'd like to close a joint account," she said. The teller asked for the account number, pulled it up, and hesitated. "You're listed as primary." "I know," Maggie said, passing her ID across the counter. "That's why I'm the one closing it." The screen blinked as the teller processed the request. Maggie could see the numbers shrinking to zero, the account dissolving from the system entirely. A few taps later, the teller handed her a receipt. "All set. Funds have been transferred to your trust account, per your instructions." She stepped back onto the sidewalk, the summer heat pressing warm against her shoulders, and felt something uncoil inside her. The account that had once been a lifeline for her son, and the leash Brittany had tried to use against her, was gone. She tucked the receipt into her bag, and didn't look back at the bank, because from this day forward, there wasn't a single key, card, or password they could use to pry their way into her life again. And as the door swung closed behind her, so did every last opening they'd ever had. The morning light spilled across Maggie's new apartment, warm and golden against the cream-colored walls she had chosen herself. There was no clutter, no forced decor chosen to impress visitors, just the few belongings she had loved enough to keep. The antique mahogany writing desk by the window. The quilt her mother had sewn decades ago. A single framed photo of her late husband, placed on the mantel as if it had been waiting all along for this final resting place. Unpacking had been more like curating than moving. Each object had been a deliberate choice, one that spoke of a life trimmed of excess and noise. Gone were the oversized dining set Brittany had insisted they all needed for family gatherings. Gone were the heavy curtains Evan liked but that blocked out the light. What remained was hers alone, each piece carrying the weight of her decision to start fresh. On the balcony, she set a small wrought iron table and two matching chairs. Every morning, she carried out her coffee and the Dallas Morning News, the smell of fresh brew mingling with the faint honeysuckle drifting from the landscaping below. It wasn't the wide wraparound porch of her old home, but it had something better: peace. Claire became a fixture in this new chapter, showing up with fresh pastries and the kind of unfiltered conversation Maggie had come to rely on. Sometimes they sat on the balcony in companionable silence, watching joggers pass by on the street below. Other times they dissected local gossip, neither of them missing the irony that Brittany's name had slipped entirely from the neighborhood's social scene. They always fall fast when there's nothing real holding them up, Claire remarked one Saturday, tearing into a croissant. Maggie only smiled, the steam from her coffee fogging her glasses for a moment. Thomas dropped by one crisp afternoon in early October, a folder tucked under his arm and a faint scent of cigar smoke clinging to his coat. He laid out a neat stack of papers across her desk: tax tips for the upcoming year, updates on investment yields, and a few reminders about trust management. "You've insulated yourself from 99% of the trouble people your age face," he said, scanning the room as if taking inventory. "The other 1% is just bad luck, and frankly, you've already used yours up." "Then I'll spend the rest of it wisely," Maggie said, sliding the folder into her file drawer. The quiet of her days was a revelation. No slammed doors, no muffled arguments through the walls, no passive-aggressive comments about pulling your weight in a house she had owned outright for 20 years. Just the hum of her fridge, the occasional chime from her phone when Claire sent a photo of something absurd she'd seen in the grocery store, and the steady rhythm of her own breathing. It was in that quiet that Maggie filed away the last of the IRS case documents. She labeled the binder in precise black ink, "Holt Matter, closed." Sliding it into place on the top shelf of her cabinet felt like sealing a vault. It wasn't bitterness she felt, it was finality. One late afternoon, the sun dipped low, casting her living room in amber light. She was arranging fresh lilies in a vase when Claire arrived, wearing a deep green scarf and holding a small bottle of Chardonnay. "You've made this place look like you've lived here forever," Claire said, glancing around with an approving eye. "That's the idea. I don't intend to move again." They poured wine, sat at the balcony table, and watched the city shift from day to night. The street lamps flickered on, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked, brief, harmless, a reminder of life's little noises that didn't intrude. When their glasses were nearly empty, Claire turned to her with that look, the one that said the next question wasn't casual. "Any regrets?" she asked, her voice even but curious. Maggie set her glass down, feeling the cool evening air brush against her skin. A smile tugged at her mouth, not the kind born from gloating, but from knowing she had done exactly what she needed to. Her answer could wait a beat. Let the silence say the first part. The chandeliers above the Dallas Country Club ballroom scattered light like 100 tiny suns, reflecting off champagne glasses and sequined gowns. The air hummed with polite laughter, the muted clink of silverware, and the faint scent of roses from the towering centerpieces on every table. Maggie stood near the stage, her name printed in elegant script on the evening's program, waiting for her turn to speak. The literacy program's annual gala had always been a fixture in her calendar, but this year felt different. This year she was here not as someone politely donating a silent auction item, but as a keynote sponsor. When the MC introduced her, former CPA, philanthropist, and lifelong advocate for financial independence, Margaret Holt, she walked to the podium with steady, unhurried steps, her deep blue gown catching the light like still water at dusk. She didn't waste time on formalities. "Financial independence," she began, her voice clear and measured, "isn't just about numbers in a bank account, it's about the freedom to choose. It's about never letting someone else hold the keys to your security or your peace of mind. The room was quiet, attentive. She kept it short, 3 minutes, no more. A brief story about a woman she once knew who rebuilt her life after being left with nothing. A reminder that literacy and financial literacy were twins in the fight for independence. She didn't name herself, but she didn't have to. When she returned to her table, Claire reached over and gave her hand a squeeze. Thomas raised his glass in her direction, his approving grin saying more than any whispered praise could. "You've still got that stage presence," Thomas murmured. "Old habits die hard," Maggie said, settling into her chair as the auctioneer took over the mic. She felt the familiar satisfaction of having said exactly enough, and nothing more. An hour later, with the bidding wars in full swing and dessert plates being cleared, Maggie slipped away. She left her half-finished champagne behind, traded the noise of the ballroom for the velvet hush of the country club's entrance hall. The doorman held the door for her, and the cool night air rushed in, carrying the faint scent of pine from the landscaped drive. Outside, the city lights glittered against the dark Texas sky. She walked slowly toward her car, enjoying the weightlessness that came from knowing she could leave whenever she pleased. No one to answer to, no one to appease. Her phone stayed buried in her evening clutch, powered off since before the gala began. No text could intrude, no late-night call could sour the aftertaste of her speech. The decision to keep it silent wasn't about fear, it was about control. She was no longer obligated to absorb anyone else's crisis. As she drove home, Dallas at night felt different, wide open and entirely hers. The streets were quiet, traffic lights blinking yellow at empty intersections. It reminded her of the nights she used to stay late at the office, long after the noise had drained from the city, when she was the only one left to lock the door. Back then, she'd felt the weight of responsibility for others. Now she carried only her own. When she reached her apartment building, the lobby's soft lighting and faint lemon polish smell greeted her like a quiet handshake. She rode the elevator alone, the mirrored walls reflecting her calm expression. No shadows of uncertainty, no flicker of doubt. Inside her apartment, she kicked off her heels, hung her gown carefully in its garment bag, and padded barefoot to the balcony. The night air was cool against her skin, the hum of distant traffic a reminder that life moved on outside these walls, whether she engaged with it or not. She lingered there for a while, watching the horizon before finally stepping back inside. She turned the deadbolt with a firm, deliberate click, the sound echoing faintly in the stillness. There was no one left who could accuse her, no one with the power to push her out again. Her finances were locked down, her future secured, her circle reduced to only those she trusted without hesitation. Everything else, the chaos, the betrayal, the noise was gone. "They threw me out. I shut them out for good,"